They said my land was perfect for a shortcut, so I turned it into a dead end. And the wildest part is, I didn't raise my voice once. I lived just outside a town called Brook Hollow, the kind of place that used to have more tractors than traffic lights. 15 years ago, I bought 5 acres there, a long rectangular stretch wedged between Millstone Road on one side and Alder Creek Drive on the other. Back then, both roads were quiet. Millstone was 2 lanes and patient. Alder Creek wasn't even fully paved yet, just gravel and ambition. I didn't buy the land as an investment strategy or some grand development plan. I bought it because it felt like breathing room. After my divorce, I needed space that didn't echo. I built a modest 1-story house set back from the road, wide porch, creaky swing, the kind of place where you can hear crickets thinking. I planted grass, a few maples, ran a split-rail fence along the front mostly for looks. The back half I left open, just a field that rolled gently downhill and caught the evening sun. For years nothing happened, which was perfect. Then Brook Hollow started growing. A tech distribution company built an office park off Millstone. Alder Creek got widened and fed into a brand new subdivision called Copper Ridge. Young families, shiny SUVs, Amazon vans like clockwork. Traffic thickened the way soup does when you forget it on the stove. I noticed it in pieces. More brake lights at rush hour. More impatient horns. More people looking for ways around each other. But I didn't realize I was part of their solution until one evening in late September. I was sitting on my porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the sun drop behind the tree line, when I saw headlights moving where headlights had no business moving. Not on Millstone. Not on Alder Creek. In my field. At first I thought someone had lost control. Maybe a teenager messing around. But the car didn't skid or swerve. It moved clean and straight, cutting diagonally across my grass from Millstone to the gravel shoulder near Alder Creek, then popped back onto pavement like it had done that 100 times. Then another set of headlights followed the same path. And another. No hesitation. No confusion. Just confidence. I stood up slowly, like if I moved too fast I'd spook whatever this was. I walked down off the porch, boots sinking slightly into the soft ground, and by the time I reached the middle of the yard, a sedan swept past about 40 yards in front of me. The driver didn't even look over. That's when I saw it clearly. Tire tracks. Not random. Not fresh and alone. A defined strip of flattened grass about 10 feet wide, running from one road to the other in a near-perfect line. Someone had connected the dots. The next morning I decided to test a theory. I poured coffee, grabbed a folding chair, and sat near the side window facing the field. Between 7:10 and 8:10 a.m., 27 vehicles cut through my property. I counted them out loud like I was tallying cattle. Sedans. Pickup trucks. A delivery van with a smiling arrow on the side. Not one slowed down. Not one waved. They drove like the land already belonged to the public. It's a strange feeling, watching strangers treat your property like negative space. I drove over to the office park that afternoon. The place was all reflective glass and carefully landscaped shrubs. I found the security guard posted near the entrance, a guy in his 50s named Carl who looked like he'd rather be fishing. I said, "Hey, you aware people are cutting across private land behind here?" He squinted at me. "You mean that field shortcut?" "It's not a shortcut," I said. "It's my yard." Carl shrugged. "Everybody uses it. Saves 10 minutes when Millstone backs up." "Everybody except me," I said. He gave me that look people give when they think you're technically right, but socially inconvenient. That evening I pulled my property survey from a filing cabinet in my office. I spread it across the kitchen table. The boundaries were exactly where they'd always been. No easements. No shared access agreements. No weird carve-outs. Just 5 acres of mine. I didn't block it right away. Part of me wanted to believe it was temporary, like a rumor that would burn out. Instead, it escalated. Within a week, the grass was mostly gone along that path. The ground packed down hard and dusty. Rideshare drivers started using it. I saw a school bus try once, inch halfway across before the driver realized this was not in the route manual and awkwardly backed out, kids' faces pressed to the windows like they were on safari. And then came the trash. A crumpled fast food bag. A soda cup rolling in the wind. Cigarette butts near the midpoint like someone had decided my land was their smoke break lounge. That hit something deeper than inconvenience. It wasn't just about time savings anymore. It was about assumption. About the idea that if enough people do something long enough, it starts feeling like a right. I stood out there one afternoon, looking at that dusty scar across my field, and I felt this mix of anger and something else, something steadier. Resolve maybe. Not the loud kind. The patient kind. I could have put up a fence, 8-foot privacy panels, razor wire if I wanted to make a point. But that would turn it into a war. And I didn't want a war. I wanted clarity. So instead of reacting fast, I started making calls. And that's where things started to get interesting. The first call I made wasn't to a lawyer, and it wasn't to the county either. It was to a landscaper named Miguel Herrera, a guy who had done some grading work for me years back when I first built the house. Miguel was the kind of man who measured twice, cut once, and didn't talk much unless there was something worth saying. I told him what was happening. He drove out that afternoon, parked by the porch, and we walked the path together. By then the grass was gone completely, replaced by compacted dirt with 2 clear tire grooves like rails. Miguel crouched, pressed his palm into the soil, then stood and looked from one road to the other. "They've driven this enough," he said. "It's basically a road now." "It's not a road," I replied. He nodded slowly. "No, it's not." I asked him a simple question. If I wanted to make it impossible to drive through here, legally, without building a fence, what would you do? Miguel didn't answer right away. He scanned the slight slope of the land, the way rainwater already drifted downhill toward Alder Creek during storms. "You've got runoff issues and heavy rain anyway," he said. "We could cut a drainage swale across this line. Not deep enough to be dangerous. Just enough that no cars clearing it without a ramp. A swale. A shallow ditch. Functional. Legal. Boring, even." I liked it immediately. Before I committed, though, I called a soil engineer out of Cedar Falls, a woman named Denise Hallbrook, who specialized in stormwater management. I explained I wanted to improve drainage and prevent erosion, which wasn't a lie. She surveyed the property, took measurements, and eventually said, "Honestly, you probably should have had something like this installed years ago. With traffic packing this down, runoff's only going to get worse." "Traffic?" I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Yeah, that's part of the issue." Denise designed a shallow channel that ran exactly along the line people had carved into my land. 18 inches deep at its lowest point, wide enough to require intention, shaped to carry water safely toward the natural slope. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical, just inconvenient. Before we broke ground, I called the county planning office. I described it as a drainage improvement project. They checked zoning, setbacks, environmental impact. Everything came back clean, as long as it didn't block a recognized access route. "There is no recognized access route," I said. "That's what we see too," the clerk replied. "Good." We started on a Thursday morning. Miguel brought a small excavator. It wasn't loud enough to feel like construction chaos, just steady mechanical movement. I stood nearby with coffee while the first strip of packed dirt was lifted and reshaped into something official. The whole thing took 2 days. When it was done, the land looked intentional. The swale curved gently with clean edges. We lined the bottom with gravel to prevent washout. I installed reflective posts at each end and placed clear signage near both road entries. Private property. No through access. I didn't hide what I did. I didn't disguise it. I simply formalized what the land had always been. The first car hit it around 5:40 that evening. I was back on the porch when a silver crossover turned off Millstone and accelerated across the field like usual. About halfway through, brake lights flared bright red. The front tires dipped slightly into the swale and stopped. The driver sat there a moment, probably calculating. Then the car reversed awkwardly, tires kicking dust, and retreated to the main road. I didn't smile, but I felt something settle in my chest. The next morning was better. Confusion spread faster than traffic ever had. Some drivers slowed when they saw the posts. Others didn't notice until the last second. A white delivery van rolled up, paused, then idled for a good 30 seconds before turning around like it had just discovered gravity. By the end of the day, cars were lining back onto Millstone where they belonged. By the end of the week, the mood had shifted from confusion to anger. I know this because Copper Ridge has a community Facebook page. I'm not a member, but my neighbor across Alder Creek, Mrs. Donnelly, is. She's 72 and treats online drama like it's cable television. She called me one evening laughing. "You're trending," she said. "Excuse me?" "People are furious about the ditch. They're calling you the porch troll." I blinked. "The what?" "Says here," she continued, "some man who lives in the middle of town thinks he owns the place and dug a trench to punish commuters." Punish commuters. That word stuck with me. 2 days later, I got a call from the city's infrastructure office. Mr. Walker? The voice said. This is Nathan Price with Municipal Planning. We've received several complaints about a drainage installation on your property that's blocking an informal access route between Millstone and Alder Creek. I leaned back in my chair. Informal access route? Yes. It appears residents have been using that connection for some time. Who authorized it? I asked. There was a pause. Well, no one formally authorized it. It developed naturally. So did the drainage issue, I said, and I addressed it naturally. Another pause, longer this time. Nathan cleared his throat. Would you consider modifying the swale to allow limited vehicle passage? Would the city consider purchasing the land and assuming liability? Silence. I'm not looking for conflict, I added. I'm maintaining my property. That's all. The call ended politely, but I could feel the pressure building behind the courtesy. 3 days later, the office park manager showed up at my door. His name was Trent Calloway, early 40s, crisp button-down shirt, no tie, expensive watch, the faint smell of cologne that tries too hard. We shook hands on the porch. Mr. Walker, he began, I think there's an opportunity here for collaboration. There usually is when someone wants something, I replied. He gave a tight smile. Our employees have been using that path for years. It reduces congestion significantly. Trespassing often does, I said. His jaw flexed slightly. We're willing to gravel the route properly. Make it official. Maintain it. Even compensate you. Compensate how? A monthly access fee. Fair market rate. I studied him for a moment. Behind him, I could see Millstone backed up in the distance, brake lights glowing in late afternoon haze. And if someone flips their SUV in a rainstorm? I asked. Or a pedestrian gets clipped? Who carries that liability? We'd work out shared responsibility, he said quickly. Shared. Interesting word. I told him I wasn't interested in turning my property into a commuter corridor. Not unlimited access, anyway. He shifted gears. What if we restricted it? Business hours only. Authorized vehicles. Now that was closer to something rational. I crossed my arms. Daytime only, I said slowly. Specific vehicle classes. Commercial insurance naming me as additionally insured. Maintenance entirely your responsibility. And clear signage stating access is conditional. He hesitated. That defeats the purpose, he admitted. Then maybe the purpose isn't mine to serve. He left looking less polished than when he arrived. For 2 weeks, traffic on both roads snarled worse than ever. People adjusted their alarms. Some cut through other neighborhoods instead. Some simply accepted reality. But pressure does interesting things to organizations. One morning, about 18 days after the ditch went in, Trent returned. This time with a folder. We'd like to propose a formal easement, he said. I didn't invite him inside. We sat at the patio table while I read every page. The draft gave them broad rights. Continuous access. Minimal restriction. Standard liability language that felt optimistic. I closed the folder. This won't work. He exhaled sharply. What would? I looked out across the field, at the clean line of the swale catching morning light. The ditch stays, I said. He frowned. We build a single controlled crossing. 1 point. Removable barriers. Access limited to defined hours. Any violation terminates the agreement immediately. No warnings. No debate. And if commuters ignore the rules, then access ends. Period. He studied me like he was trying to decide whether I was stubborn or strategic. Maybe both. He said he'd take it back to his legal team. And that's when the real waiting began. Waiting is a strange kind of power. You don't feel like you're doing anything, but everything is moving because you decided not to move. For about a week after Trent left with my redlined version of the easement, I didn't hear a word. No calls from the city. No surprise visits. Just the usual morning congestion stacking up on Millstone and Alder Creek like 2 clogged arteries that refused to cooperate. And I'll admit something that might not make me look noble. There were mornings I sat on my porch with coffee and watched the traffic back up, and I felt a small, quiet satisfaction. Not revenge exactly. More like equilibrium. For weeks they'd treated my land like empty space, like a convenience that didn't need permission. Now they were confronting the cost of that assumption. Mrs. Donnelly kept me updated on the neighborhood chatter. They're saying you're hurting local business, she told me one afternoon, leaning over my fence like a news anchor with fresh headlines. Some folks think the city should use eminent domain. I almost laughed. For 5 acres of grass and a house. I said, that'd be one expensive shortcut. Still, the word eminent lingered in the back of my mind longer than I liked. Governments can get creative when enough voters are annoyed. That night, I walked the property line with a flashlight, not because I was afraid someone would vandalize the swale, but because I needed to remind myself of something. The boundary stakes were still there, metal pins sunk into the earth long before Copper Ridge existed. The survey markers didn't care about commuter outrage. They just marked truth. 3 days later, Trent's black SUV rolled up my driveway again. This time he didn't look polished. He looked tired. "We'll accept your terms," he said before he even sat down. Just like that? There was internal discussion, he admitted. But traffic data isn't in our favor. Employees are complaining. So are residents. And the city made it clear they're not stepping in. I didn't react outwardly, but something unclenched inside me. He slid a new draft across the table. I read it carefully. The language was tighter. Clear hours. 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday through Friday. Passenger vehicles and light commercial vans only. Full liability and indemnification on their side. Automatic termination clause if barriers were bypassed or signage ignored. One controlled crossing point constructed to my approval. The swale remains intact everywhere else. "You're serious about the ditch staying?" he asked. "Absolutely." He looked out over the field. "It's symbolic, isn't it?" "No," I said. "It's practical. Symbols are for speeches. This is about boundaries." We signed 3 days later at a small title office downtown. No ceremony. Just paperwork and the soft hum of a copier sealing something that had started as tire tracks in my grass. Construction of the crossing happened the following week. Miguel came back to oversee it, and I insisted on being present the entire time. We cut a reinforced concrete culvert through one narrow section of the swale. Steel sleeves anchored into the soil. On either side, heavy-duty removable bollards that could be locked in place after hours. Clear signage mounted on posts. Authorized access only. Hours enforced. Violations result in permanent closure. It didn't look like a public road. It looked like what it was. Conditional. The first Monday it opened, I woke up early and walked out to the porch before sunrise. Fog hung low over the field. For a moment, it was quiet enough to forget any of this had happened. At exactly 7:02 a.m., the first car approached from Millstone. It slowed. Really slowed. The driver read the sign, eased forward, crossed at the designated point, and continued on. No dust cloud. No diagonal cut. No assumption. Just a line. Throughout the morning, cars followed the same path. Some hesitated. Some looked irritated. But they obeyed. And at 6 p.m. sharp, Miguel and I stepped out and locked the bollards in place. The sound of metal sliding into its housing was deeply satisfying. About a week later, something interesting happened. At 6:23 p.m., a white pickup tried to weave around the locked barrier. The driver attempted to dip into the swale a few feet down where the slope was gentler. He misjudged. The front tires dropped lower than expected, and the truck bottomed out with a dull, embarrassing scrape. I walked out calmly while he was still rocking the vehicle back and forth, trying to free it. "Evening," I said. He glared at me through the open window. "This is ridiculous. It's barely after 6. Hours are posted," I replied. "You can't just trap people." I gestured around us. "You drove onto private property after hours and ignored a barrier. That's not a trap. That's a decision." He muttered something under his breath, but eventually called a tow truck. The next morning, I emailed Trent. 1 violation attempt. As agreed, per Clause 8 subsection C, access is suspended pending review. He called within 10 minutes. "Come on," he said, frustration cracking through his polished tone. "One guy doesn't represent everyone. That's why the clause exists," I said evenly. "So everyone holds each other accountable." There was a long pause. "What do you want?" I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence work. "I want your company to send a formal notice to all employees and partner drivers. Clear consequences. And I want a posted security camera at the crossing, funded by you, monitored by you, footage accessible to me." He exhaled. "That's excessive. So is assuming 5 acres of land belong to whoever's in a hurry." We reopened access 3 days later after the notices went out and the camera was installed. And you know what? It worked. Not perfectly. Nothing is. But mostly. People slowed down. They respected the hours. The diagonal scar across my field began to fade everywhere except the controlled crossing. Grass started creeping back over the old tire grooves like nature reclaiming a sentence someone else tried to write. Sometimes in the evenings I walk along the swale and think about how small the original act seemed. A few cars cutting across open land. Harmless, some might say. Efficient. Practical. But here's the thing about shortcuts. They almost always belong to someone. Convenience has a cost. And if that cost isn't paid up front, it gets extracted somewhere else, usually quietly, usually from the person who didn't volunteer. I didn't build the ditch out of spite. I built it because lines matter. Not to be cruel, not to hoard space, but because ownership without boundaries isn't ownership at all. It's suggestion. And here's where it gets complicated. A few months ago, a couple from Copper Ridge stopped by. Young parents. They thanked me. Said the controlled crossing actually made things safer. Fewer near misses. More predictability. They admitted at first they were angry. They'd call me selfish online. But once the system settled, they saw the difference. That stuck with me. Because the truth is, this was never just about grass or traffic. It was about the quiet way communities test limits. About what happens when enough people say everyone does it and forget to ask should we. Some folks in town still think I overreacted. They say I could have just let it be. After all, what's a little where on 5 acres? Maybe they're right. Or maybe the day you stop defending small boundaries is the day you wake up and realize you don't recognize the lines anymore. So I'll leave you with this. If that had been your land, what would you have done? Would you have fenced it off completely? Sold the easement without conditions? Let the shortcut live and adapted? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Turned a convenience into a conversation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you land on this, because communities are complicated, and so is ownership. And if you appreciate real stories about everyday conflicts that turn into something bigger than expected, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. Because sometimes the most interesting battles aren't fought in courtrooms or headlines. They're fought quietly, right across your own front yard.